Thank you. Can you tell us what time you're outside the assembly tomorrow?
About 12.
We're starting at 12 o'clock, and this goes through the speeches to about 2:30. Yeah.
Mark Morgan, Portugal Chamber of Trade. Just wanted to know the chemicals they use with fracking. What are they, and what is their function?
As I understand it, the chemicals that are used are there to help the free flow of both gas up and also of the sand and the mixture that goes down. I don't know what the composition of those chemicals is, and I understand that the industry, at least initially, is committed to using chemicals which are relatively inert and are not likely to be contaminants. But there are 2 points with that. The first is that because this is an industry in its infancy, it's not likely to be the subject, it's very much more likely to be the subject of intense scrutiny than when there are thousands of fracking wells about the place. And the second is that regardless of the chemical composition of what's put down those holes, what comes up is another matter entirely. And that's why you have those huge settlement points that you saw a picture of on the screen, is because you have millions of gallons from each frack coming back up, which is contaminated with, as I said, radioactivity and salts and metals and all sorts. And as far as I know, there's no way to deal with that. So I don't know what the strategy of the companies is, other than to just hold it in these huge settlement tanks and hope that components of it off gas and dissipate into the atmosphere. I just don't know.
Laurie Desmond-Williams, I'm a town councillor for this particular ward of West Central. I believe there's been an application for Merthyr Mawr for drilling down there. But the thing is, around that area, there are a lot of underground wells and there's quite a high water table. So when you're talking about millions of gallons of water and all these chemicals, what impact would that have on the water table in that area, but more importantly, on the coastline around this area?
There's a real issue here with private boreholes, because Natural Resources Wales doesn't have a register of private boreholes, so it doesn't know where people are extracting water, either for their own drinking water or for livestock. So where those aquifers are potentially contaminated, then Natural Resources Wales simply is unable to regulate that activity. The geologists who work for the companies are supposed to be able to know where the aquifers are, but I think that this is something which is actually very difficult for them to know, because obviously in 3 dimensions, the geometry of the geology underneath the ground is incredibly tricky to be able to know precisely where things lie. And I think if I would certainly be concerned if I thought that there was the potential for groundwater to be affected. We certainly know that the extent of the groundwater in and around the Schwick rising is absolutely huge. It goes for tens of miles in a northeasterly and in a northwesterly direction, and so if any part of that is contaminated, then you could see the potential for the Schwick rising to be contaminated. Now, that's not currently used for drinking water, but the only reason it's not currently used for drinking water is because we have a very big supply of drinking water from the reservoirs. That's not to say we wouldn't want to use it at some point in future. And the Environment Agency has a document, it's called Underground Under Threat, and it details the issues of contamination of groundwater. And what it says in that document is that contamination which on the surface, so in a lake, would take days or weeks to be made good through natural processes, in groundwater it'll take decades or centuries. So once you contaminate these water sources, you've pretty much had it. And there are case studies of the Environment Agency having to try and clean up groundwater after it's been contaminated. And the cost is absolutely horrendous. And who would pay for that cost? It's going to be you and me and taxpayers. These companies are just going to walk away.
Before I go, just because I know it's mainly anti-fracking here, can I ask why the Environment Agency Wales has written to Bridgend Borough Council quite specifically saying we are confident that our current regulatory framework provides us with the tools we need to protect people and the environment from the exploration of shale gas?
Yeah, I mean, the regulation of this is a multifaceted thing. So, for example, the casing of the wells, the safety and the integrity of that casing is down to the HSE. The HSE only has 6 well inspectors for the entire UK. So you can see that if there were to be any problem with the shell casing, or with the well casing, who's going to pick that up? The Environment Agency, as it was, Natural Resources Wales, depends almost exclusively on self-regulation by the industry. And they do it because they simply haven't got the resources to be able to monitor everything. By and large, they come into action when someone notices that something has gone wrong, and the industry is unlikely to be the first to hold their hands up and say, actually, I think we've contaminated groundwater here. So they monitor. So I take it that they monitor the groundwater in various ways. But I mean, it would be down to Do With Cymru, for example. They'll be monitoring what happens in the Schwick uprising. And if that were contaminated, then I guess they would let Natural Resources Wales know. But I certainly I'm not confident that the regulatory expertise exists, and not least because this is an industry that has never existed in Wales before. So how can they be entirely confident that they have the expertise when they're dealing with something that they just don't know about?
You see that if an anthem bomb has gone off, they're always the same.
Yeah, but this is what our councillors have to work with. It's the advice that they are getting from an official agency.
Yeah, well, it's not a very good idea to take advice from authority. Anybody who knows anything about critical thinking will tell you that. It's a well-known unscientific way.
I think we're going off on another tack there. Margaret.
Well, just to add to this water issue, what do Welsh do a Cymru think?
Well, this is one of the problems we came up against in the planning appeal in Wales Glamorgan, is that Welsh Water is not a statutory consultee. So regardless of what Do With Cymru say, their view is irrelevant. The only view that is relevant in terms of environmental protection is now Natural Resources Wales. And as I said before, I mean, I don't know what resources Natural Resources Wales has to put into this. In fact, I think an FOI request has been put to them asking what their level of expertise is. And I look forward to receiving a response to that.
Now, if I can add 3 quick points. In the application in the Ogmore Valley, Centrica detailed that wastewater from the fracking process would go into natural watercourse. And in the first instance, it was a concern to residents, especially in an ex-mining community, of the layers of mining within the hills and how deep this was going. And miners said that NCB never had any detail on the depth of the South Devonian aquifer, or for the way that it differentiated in different watercourses, is what I'm trying to say, and moved around, hence why they constantly had to change levels and direction of the way they were doing shafts and mining levels. Centrica dismissed that and said they wouldn't be going nowhere near it, but they also said they didn't know where it was. And as for water coming in, you're quite right about the tankers. They quoted 32 tankers a day, but I think that's just for one test drilling, not the actual site that would develop, but for the test site. And as far as the water coming in, we said, where was it coming from?
And the indication was given that it was coming from our rivers. I'd like to know the sustainability of that, especially in summer. The anglers were particularly upset.
Well, the companies would presumably have to have an abstraction license to be taking it out of the rivers, you have to be licensed to be taking out water, certainly that scale out of the rivers. The ironic thing is that for hydropower in rivers, you need an abstraction license. So if you have a choice, what would you rather use your water for? Would you rather be generating renewable electricity 24/7, or would you rather it be used to squirt under the ground and come up with shale gas or coal bed methane?
And the reality is, with both the test streams, that the water's taken from the main supply, and that's what's caused issues in Balkans. They've been taking so much out of the main water supply, even though there's no fracking going on, it's been causing all sorts of backflow issues in the main supply and contaminating people's supply in Balkan already.
I'd be very concerned if the strategy for getting rid of wastewater from these activities was simply to let it go into a water course.
So were we.
Well, yeah, understandably, and I would want to be knowing, okay, so who's monitoring what the quality of this water is? And has Natural Resources Wales got the capacity to be dealing with all these things? I mean, clearly not, is my impression.
The lady at the back.
Yes, my name's Sue Howley. I don't actually live here anymore, but my family do. I work as a project manager for a company called IPC Media, which is nothing to do with the subject in hand. As part of my job, I have to work with risk analysis. And one of the local risks I see here is that it's a radon-rich area. So what happens when we have these seismic disturbances caused by fracking to the radon underneath our feet? What happens to our community if we have increased levels of radon in the area, health risks, etc. And the other thing is looking at the diagram of the underground coal gasification earlier, where they're expecting the level of rock above these cavities to remain stable. When you are getting